IndieSeen month 2. We've got a big show tonight for everybody. Kicking the Seat presents IndieSeen. This is the follow-up to our previous series, The Slowdown. We're not just talking about slow cinema anymore. We are talking about the entire galaxy, the interconnected universe, as it were, of independent film. And joining Sujewa and I tonight is the one, the only Dan Mirvish, the co-founder, the founder of Slamdance, and the director and co-writer of the wonderful new movie 18 and a Half, which we are going to talk about quite a great deal tonight. And yeah, before we get to that though, wait, Dan, you're muted.
Dan, no sound.
No sound.
I can text him.
Oh, now he's frozen.
Oh,
there he is.
Okay.
It's all right.
If tech problems happen, Dan, I'll text you.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. So welcome, Dan. We're glad to hang out and have you on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, fellas. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, so Sujewa, before we get started, you have a couple of things that you wanted to talk about. One is something happening on Twitter, and the other is something happening with your movie, The Secret Society for Slow Romance, which you can see everybody is actually behind him. Got a bona fide critic's quote and everything. So yeah, let's
a brand new critic.
Yeah, dive in.
All right. So in the spirit of IndieSeen, indie film community, I'm trying to organize a thing where thousands of indie filmmakers and indie film fans donate to the Patreons and Substacks of film reviewers who, like Ian and like Bill Arsenault, I may be mispronouncing his last name, like Jamie Toth, who cover real indie film festival, experimental, underground, DIY type movies, which is a different number of categories than Hollywood movies that come out that everyone rushes out to write about. So I was thinking maybe, I mean, there's like 10 million people who watch movies on at film festivals. That's a very large community. And there are thousands of indie filmmakers who make and release a movie every 1, 2, 3, 4 years. 1 to 3 to 4 years. So I was thinking if like a couple thousand indie filmmakers were to donate $5 each to a month to about 20 or maybe more if you have the money reviewers, that would create a sort of a stable economy, a stable support system for indie film reviewers to make a couple thousand to 5,000 or so a month. And then they can really get into a lot of the festival movies, real indie movies that need coverage. And in the long run, it will be good for everyone. It's kind of like donating or paying a submission fee to a film festival. You're not guaranteed to get in, you're not guaranteed a positive response, but at least you can help ensure that the reviewers are there, active, that there's a scene that you can promote your movie to when you finish a movie. Every time I finish a movie, it's just like starting all over with the publicity. I've given myself and Dan can talk about this, and I've given myself like 6 months to figure out how to market this one, because you have to start from scratch, see who's reviewing, what websites are up, blah, blah, blah. So that's what's happening. Go to my Twitter, Sujewa Fantastic, or @Sujewa Fantastic. There's a whole thread about this, and the people like Dan Mirvish and Ted Hope, super producer, have said it was a good idea.
I think it's a good idea too. And I
Awesome.
think we should be clear that we're not talking about filmmakers supporting film journalists to buy favored reviews.
No, like I said, it's
not at all.
Yeah. It's like submitting to a festival or donating to a festival or an art house, just to make sure they can exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to track that if you can and see how the donations ebb and flow with the coverage that they receive.
Well, I think it's not going to be that big a deal, because it takes a year to 3-4 years to make and release a movie.
Yeah.
So we'll be promoting, we'll be supporting people during that whole time. And on the film reviewers end, it's a good idea if you hate an indie movie not to write about it, because no one needs the drama unless there's a really good reason to not to write about it if it's socially harmful in some way.
That's kind of where you lose me though, because
that's fine. But let me just say that this is a practice that people like Matt Solar Sites and a lot of big reviewers use because they don't want to crush the startups, because you want the indie filmmakers to try to make more movies, even if the early ones are bad. But each reviewer can do whatever they want.
Sure, but I mean, there is something to be said for only reading good reviews.
Or it could be mixed.
Yeah.
Or it could be like 80% bad, 20% good. It doesn't matter as long as it's not. I'm targeting people who are not into indie movies but are snarky, dismissive, who are always writing about Hollywood movies, but whenever they have to review an indie movie, like it's clear they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're like, yeah, I don't get this movie, blah blah blah.
Well, but there's a flip side to that too, which is, a critic who puts that kind of stuff out there, it's not a one-way street. The community who, if they're reading this stuff and they can educate that reviewer and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, go check out this movie and that. So they'll hear about it. If you have kind of troll reviewers out there putting this stuff out on a regular basis, they can get educated. Or not. I mean, it's a big ecosystem. I like the idea in principle. I'm just not a fan of, if you don't like something, don't write about it, because
well, that's just my recommendation. But obviously people are free to write whatever they want or not write about it. And reviewers make that decision all the time, even with Hollywood movies. No one wants to write about everything.
True, but there is usually some kind of an outlet, because if you're going to spend 100 minutes or 3 hours watching something, it is an investment, taking notes and getting invested in, even if you don't like it. So to come out of that and say, well, I'm just not going to share my thoughts on it in any capacity, whether that's 5 minutes on a podcast or 1,000 words in a review, that energy kind of has to go somewhere.
It's up to the person. It's also filmmakers already know who's writing to some degree, who likes indie stuff, who understands it. Like, it's like a couple of years ago with slow cinema, right? You didn't like it. And, I probably wouldn't have followed you because, I was into slow cinema. But now that you're into art house stuff and you cover that stuff, it's more enjoyable for me to, read your stuff and support your stuff. Even if you don't like Godard movie, a certain Godard movie, that's fine. Not everyone's gonna like everything.
Yeah, but you've turned me into a weird Frankenstein monster, because now I'm seeing like big movies that have slow cinema elements in them, and I'm pointing them out, and it's just fun. I love that our ongoing education. So thank you again. I'm going to thank you till the end of time for that education.
Yesterday one last thing. Yesterday I was watching Sofia Coppola's On the Rocks, and
I haven't seen that yet.
It's okay. They would set up a scene, and the plot would move. I'm like, no. Let's spend half an hour on that point.
Well, I mean, that could be good or bad.
I wanted it to just get more into the characters, but it was like a regular indie movie, Hollywood inspired, where they just move through the plot to get to the end. But it's an overall good movie. Check it out on Apple TV.
Yeah. All right. So, and then the other bigger news, I would say, you got something going on with your movie, right?
That's right. Well, Dan, what do you think about the new movement to get indie reviewers paid?
Oh, so I think it's a great idea. And I think what you hit on, which I tried to talk about, but I actually got it wrong on Twitter, is that it plays into the rules of Rotten Tomatoes.
That's a good idea.
Except the rules changed, and you actually need 40 reviews. It used to be 20. I think now you need 40 reviews to be certified fresh. So you could have like a 99% freshness and have 39 reviewers, and it won't be certified until you get that 40th review. And 5 of those 40 have to be like a top reviewers, so-called top reviewers. Anyway, but the point is, but you can't even get a percentage on there until you have 5 total Rotten Tomato qualified reviews up there. So like right now with my film 18.5, I have 4 reviews, and they're all great reviews. They're all fresh, but it doesn't give a percentage yet. Anyway, the point is, it's Hollywood knows, everybody seems to know that Rotten Tomatoes, everybody hates it, and yet we're all stuck with it.
That's right.
It follows you on every website, everywhere you go. It's going to be there for a long time, until someone else challenges it. But so we may as well sort of be aware of the rules and try to find our own loopholes to those rules. And I think you've kind of hit on it, which is to create our own little mini ecosystem of reviewers, some of whom are Rotten Tomato accredited, others may not be, but eventually they may be
in the future,
if they do enough reviews. Exactly. And then retroactively, those reviews will become accreditable. But the point is, the big Hollywood productions or indie would, they have publicists. They know exactly, how many Rotten Tomato reviews they're getting and when they're getting them, and they do them in a certain way. And by the way, they have plenty of swag that they send to, reviewers, so which is worth a lot more than $5. There's a lot, there's plenty of pay or play that goes on in that world, even if nobody acknowledges it, even if it's on a small scale. So I think it's totally appropriate to be saying, hey, yeah, let's all support each other. But I think what it does is it does, as you say, it creates a core group of, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 40, maybe it's more,
50,
maybe it's 60.
50,
Reviewers that are actually not just going to the same, 6 film festivals and only reviewing things that are about to come out in Oscar season, which are already getting 100 reviews anyway. So, so that's the thing that I'm dealing with now. And I actually, and Ian, I don't know if you saw the piece I wrote for Filmmaker magazine this week, called what was it? 9 ways to premiere at a hybrid film festival. But kind of the yeah. So the preamble to that really kind of goes into this, the fact that, especially with COVID, budgets have been cut for individual freelance critics and critics at, magazines and whatever passes from websites these days. And so they're physically attending fewer festivals, but the irony is there's more virtual festivals or hybrid festivals that they can be attending, but they're just not. And so, I think this is the kind of thing to give a little bit of incentive to those critics to say, hey, you want to make a mark? Like, don't stop reviewing the same films that 100 other critics are going to review, because guess what? Your name's never going to be the blurb on that poster. Maybe, no one's going to really read your review. But if you're like the 1 out of 20 reviewers, criticizing or praising an indie film that not everyone has discovered yet, honestly, that's going to be better for your own career too. And I'm always surprised that critics don't always see it that way. But anyway, everyone's different. Everyone's trying to get their own thing going, and there's critics all over the world, and they all have a different and appropriate agendas. So anyway, so I think Sujewa is really, if nothing else, it's a great discussion to have. And I'm glad folks like Ted have kind of, taken up the mantle and said, yeah, there's a there. We should be talking about this.
Yeah, well, without the commercial or career building aspect, the community doesn't talk enough. It's people doing random things at random times. Like if like me and Ian were in touch, something interesting is happening, I emailed him, maybe a couple of months down the road, we connect, right? So a lot of filmmakers and a lot of film reviewers can have that, because a lot of us are really into some of the same things and doing something that's slightly different. Filmmaking versus thinking deeply about movies. Like a lot of the best reviews I've read about indie films have come from not superstar, reviewers, but indie reviewers who are taking their time to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta kind of stand up for the not the Tomatometer in specific, because I am as of this year a certified Tomatometer critic.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. It was one of those things where I applied and gotten rejected a couple of times, and then, as always happens, the one time I stopped paying attention, I was like, oh, I got certified somehow. But I wasn't aware of this rules change with the bumping up from 20 to 40 there's probably an email about it somewhere in my spam folder. I barely pay attention to these things because honestly, it's cool being on the Rotten Tomatoes, whatever, but because I don't post a lot of written reviews, I mostly do podcasts and things. It's just not really in my consciousness that much. But you know, you're seeing this in a lot of these platforms are kind of bumping up their thresholds now. You know, half the conversations I see on Twitter are people complaining that, you know, it's the 5th time and they've denied me being certified, you know, a blue check mark. I'm like, well, why is it that important? Yeah,
exactly. Right.
But it is to some people. And then on you know, YouTube, they have you know, been like in the last few years, they keep bumping or changing their revenue streams. So, you know, the amount of money you have to or the amount of views you have to get on your videos over a certain amount of time in order to get monetized, and all that stuff keeps going up. So yeah, there's just something fishy going on. Not fishy, but there's like a weird evolution going on in terms of how the algorithms or the people that are programming the algorithms are designating people as being legit. But as far as the film critic thing, I mean, I agree. I'm all for more people seeing more different kinds of things. But, you know, you kind of mentioned this, Dan, with you know, budgets being slashed and all that stuff. The dirty little secret of film criticism is very few of us are, you know, film critics, people who make our money that way. So when you're asked, why aren't film critics watching?
Same thing with indie filmmakers. Everyone has a day job.
But it's different because an indie filmmaker is going to spend a couple of years making, you know, a movie, and that's what they're dedicating their life to. A film critic, their job is to watch movies and think about them and talk about them, whether it's in written form or on podcasts. So, I mean, I can tell you, I put out 3 shows a week, and sometimes I'll do a written review and I'll do interviews and things. So my days, on top of having a family and a day job, are packed. There's no, if I'm not watching a movie that I've never heard of, it's not because I don't want to or I don't care or whatever. It's just there are 1,000 movies and 1,000 filmmakers out there. And yeah, sometimes I gravitate towards the big budget stuff that I'm interested in because I think there's an interesting conversation. Sometimes it takes somebody tapping me on the shoulder and say, hey, what about this? And I'll make time for that. So I think you're onto something here with building that community, if nothing else, to build awareness. But I also want to just make sure everyone understands that it's not that film critics are snobs or they only want to write about the cool stuff. It's just there's so much stuff out there that a lot of times the things they hear about are because they're hearing about stuff from their peers or, you know, frankly, the media and the studios. Award season swag is real. Now, whether or not you succumb to that and like, oh, I got a giant hardbound book in the mail, you know, Netflix sends me these beautiful hardbound, you know, rare books each year. And they tend to be for movies I hate. But then again, there are also movies that people love, like Roma, for example. Anyway,
hold on to them and auction them in 10 years.
I probably will. Anyway,
yeah, just one last thing. I just want to make sure that good reviewers who are covering indie stuff make a couple $1,000s a month to do that, and then it'll be better in the long term for everyone.
If you know, and that's the other thing, though. That is a great idea. However, maybe I just am not aware of the finances of independent filmmakers, but you know, what it would take for a large community of reviewers, the number of reviewers out there, to get them all several $1,000s a month in order to survive.
I did the math.
Right. Okay. But who is paying them all this money? Is it all the independent filmmakers?
Okay. So filmmakers spend tens of thousands of dollars every year, right? So
some of them do.
Almost all indie filmmakers who make features end up spending one way or another, their money or other people's money, tens of thousands of dollars every year. So if I do a Patreon for 20 reviewers that I like, $5 each, that's $100 a month, $1,200 a year. That's nothing to the amount of money we spend. Not nothing. It's it's something, but it's not anything remotely related to the high cost that we spend on making movies. If we make movies, putting a lot of time into it, and there's no one to understand or read about or write about those movies, then it's not a great outcome. So it's better for indie filmmakers for there to be an indie film press that where there's at least a chance of your film being noticed. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just, with the number of filmmakers out there and the number of film critics, I just don't I just, if there's that much disposable income out there amongst
It's
independent
not disposable,
filmmakers,
it's just a part of the expense.
well, but sure, here's the thing. Like if I were to spend $100 a month on anything that is not, budgeted in my household, I'd be having a very serious conversation with
I meant to say that could be folded into the budgets of each movie. So the $1,200 I'm going to spend this year on supporting indie, film reviewers will be a part of the budget for the next movie,
okay.
as promotion, as outreach, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys would probably know better than I do. I just don't see it.
And Hollywood also does this on a much bigger scale.
Well, yeah, but they're talking, you've got, hundreds of millions of dollars at the at their disposal, right? So, but
anyway, let's see how it goes. I think it's a good idea.
All right, and we definitely shall see, and I'll be watching with great interest, as
awesome,
as Palpatine said, but not with that devious intent. Anyway, Sujewa, tell me briefly what's going on with Slow Romance. I know it's done. I've got a link to watch it, and we're gonna be talking about it next week, a week from tonight, in fact.
Big episode. No, I'm already supporting like 6 reviewers with small donations and Filmmaker, so I'm gonna bump it up to 20, maybe 50 in the next coming years. Anyway, Slow Romance, awesome. Everyone should do it. It's you got to keep things going. Slow Romance is done. It's gone out to a number of festivals, 6, I think. Got a great review from Jamie Toth. Bill Arsenault is I gotta figure out how to pronounce his name properly.
I think you got it right, Arsenault. Yeah.
And Bill Arsenault is going to write about it next week, I think. And then in December, January, I'm going to do proper media outreach and try to get the movie out to a lot of people. Proper screeners with security, blah, 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 all the sound work done. And next Sunday, we'll do a big show about it. You, me, Ian, myself, and Aaliyah. Very happy with the movie. It's unusual. Maybe a little bit easier than Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, but we'll see. I'll send you a link, Dan, in a week or so. And what else? So hopefully New York, LA, Chicago theatrical next year. I'm working on that now.
Dig it. All right. And that brings us to, I like that transition. I've never seen a transition with a coffee cup before.
That's right.
That is an awesome mug. 18 and a half. Dan, tell us about 18 and a half.
All right.
Let's ask questions.
It is it's my new film, new
awesome.
Narrative feature film. Thank you. It's just at the root of it. It's about the missing 18.5-minute gap in the Nixon Watergate tapes, and about a young transcriber in the Nixon White House who gets a hold of the tape and tries to leak it to a reporter, and nefarious forces are out to get them, or are they? So that's the movie.
I've seen it.
Very short nutshell.
Ian, you saw it?
Yeah.
That's the silly question I asked on every show.
I come prepared.
That's right.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Dan, tell us about your festival experience so far.
So we just had our world premiere at the Woodstock Film Festival in Woodstock, New York. That was about 2 weeks ago, and had a great screening there. It was a hybrid festival, so we had a sold out screening inside at a theater there. And then a huge drive-in screening on a 70-foot screen. And then also they had some online screenings as well. So that was the world premiere. The international premiere will be in about 2 weeks at the Sao Paulo International Film Festival in Brazil.
Awesome.
And then in between, we have our Midwestern premiere is at Tallgrass Film Festival in Wichita, Kansas. Actually, just today it was announced that we're going to be at the St. Louis International Film Festival in St. Louis, Missouri on November 10th. So those are the ones I can talk about. We have a big European one coming that I can't mention yet. I don't think it's been announced yet, but I think will be this week. And actually just today got invited to another one. And awesome. So we've got a few festivals this fall. And then meanwhile, we're trying to get distribution. We're trying to get international foreign sales, trying to get reviews, but just having fun with it. Yeah.
So clarify for filmmakers who are watching, clarify the getting invited process that you're doing. So this is people that you know, film festivals that you know, They heard that your movie's done. So
they're not all ones. They're not all ones that I know, but I've been kicking around a while. That I do know a lot of them. Because I'm a co-founder.
You wrote a book on
Slamdance. I wrote a book. I'm yes, the Cheerful Subversives Guide to Independent Filmmaking.
That's right.
This is the second edition, which just came out this summer, and available wherever fine books like these are sold, which is
I will link
Amazon.
to it in the description, everyone. So check it out.
Yeah, there you
right.
go.
So
that actually has a whole. There's an appendix with my secret list of film festivals worth considering.
Awesome.
In there. It's not so much of a secret anymore since I just published it in a book. But
I'm going to use it.
Yeah, but basically, starting in the summer, when we had a pretty well finished version of the film, I started reaching out to film festivals and submitting.
Great.
So, but it's, I just wrote a piece for Filmmaker magazine about sort of 9 tips to do when you go to a hybrid film festival. But it's really kind of talking about how this is such a weird year for film festivals. For years. For 100 years, they were, live events. And then last year they all went online. And so that kind of had its own set of rules. But this year, all the film festivals thought they were going to be live. And then the Delta variant came up, and all of a sudden, a lot of festivals are retrenching and reconsidering what they're doing. And you don't always know, they don't always know until a few weeks before, depending on what local regulations are and things like that, and which variant happens to be spiking or is in a trough. And so it's kind of created a little bit of this Wild West where festivals are kind of making decisions at the last minute. Filmmakers are making decisions at the last minute. Like, is it, and you have to ask really important questions. Like just today, I got invited to one. And I'm like, well, what's the vaccination rate in that community? Is it worth going to live? Or is there going to be a live screening? And if there's not live screenings, is there revenue sharing? So there's a lot more discussion back and forth between filmmakers and festivals now than raising interesting questions. And we've turned down a few festivals because they just didn't make sense for us already. So
yeah, I have a question about that. My understanding or my experience with festivals is you submit, you hear nothing for months, then you hear something back, right? I think maybe film festivals could communicate better and create more revenue streams by talking to filmmakers more often. What do you think?
Well, not necessarily. I know, having been involved with Slamdance, one of the things that we're very proud of that we do that's different from other festivals is we make all the decisions at the same time, all at the end. There's no early invitations. There's no early, there's no,
not early invitations.
But the point is, as opposed to other festivals that do kind of invite people early in the process and have, and because of that, there is a little bit more communication like, hey, if I'm premiering at this festival, are you still going to consider me? Yes or no, or, there is a bit more of a conversation. So, and there's no right or wrong way of doing that, but it's, but in order, anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe film festivals can provide more services to filmmakers, and in exchange, they could maybe get more revenue from filmmakers. I don't know. It's something to think about.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that I used to find that there was a distinction between screenplay competitions where, because again, Slamdance, we have a screenplay competition, and early on we decided, well, we'll give a service, we'll give constructive, criticism, for example, coverage to anyone. And I don't remember now how it works if you have to pay extra for it or whatever, but whether you win, lose, or otherwise, at least there is something you can get from it. And I always used to think that was not important to filmmakers for festivals, because if you had a finished film, it was done. Didn't matter what someone told you. You can't change it because the negative was done. With the negative was cut, you were done at the lab. Now, of course, since everyone's working digitally, there is a little bit more back and forth. Like, oh, would you want criticism from a festival while you're still at a point where you can make changes? Some filmmakers would want that. Others wouldn't want that. Some film festivals would want to give it, others wouldn't. So there's a little bit more room for that now, I suppose. But anyway, but I don't know. That's not.
All right, that's a different podcast episode. Ian, what'd you think about 18 and a half?
I thought it was really good. It's one of those movies that by the end of it, I knew immediately that I would have to watch it again.
Yeah, it changes throughout the show.
Well, Dan put, in his nice synopsis there. He mentioned something about, and there are people out to get our main characters, or are there, something to that effect. There is that paranoia, which has several different layers of meaning for, a couple of these characters throughout the movie. And it's not until it all becomes unraveled at the end. There's a nice little visual metaphor in there too. That you start it's like the usual suspects on crack. You just start going back and thinking about what you've known about all of the, like, every character in the movie from the moment they show up on screen. You're like, wow, I had no clue. So yeah, it's tough to evaluate. I watched it literally this afternoon. Like, I finished it a few hours ago, so it's still fresh in my head, and I'm grateful to be able to talk to you about it. I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. This is more like I hope people will hear my description of how I felt about it afterwards as an invitation. Like, I have to go check this out, and I definitely think you should.
Well, you can when we're done with the official podcast, you can click record off, and I can answer all the spoiler questions for you. Happy to do that.
All right.
Great access to the filmmaker.
Yes, but no, I'm curious about the origin of this film. I mean, the 18.5 minutes is, the most famous 18.5 minutes perhaps in all of history. So where did the germ of this idea? I know you co-wrote the film, so tell me a bit about how, like, what inspired you to tell this story. And because it feels like it's historical, a historical drama, but it's historical fiction. So there's the deciding to tell a story built around these 18.5 minutes, and then deciding to tell this specific story, and then all the kind of internecine details that are layered within there. So it's not just the reveals that are layered, it's the storytelling itself. So
thanks.
Tell me about it.
So yeah, my last film that I directed was called Bernard and Huey, and that was written by Jules Feiffer, who's a Pulitzer Oscar-winning screenwriter.
I met him when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
I went to see him speak because I was big into political cartoons. My mom took me to a 4-hour symposium, and I met him afterwards. I was so jazzed. And then I found out years later who he was, and it's like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I got to work with him. So my last film awesome. was a script that he'd written 30 years earlier, and then we kind of discovered it and made it. And the last day we wrapped, which was in New York, was the day before the 2016 November election, a presidential election. And then the next day I went out to see Jules at his house in Shelter Island. So it was the day after the election, and I was showing him dailies from the film, and we were naturally talking about Trump, and everyone was all upset, well, except for those who liked him, but and the natural comparisons to Nixon came up, and the underlying idea was, well, we survived Nixon, and we can survive this guy. But it was interesting talking to Jules because he had been a cartoonist, as you say, political cartoonist for the Village Voice for 30 years. And a lot of his cartoons were about Nixon. He actually did a compilation of them. So it was interesting talking to him about that. Now, the guy that was with me that kind of drove me out to Shelter Island was my friend Terry Keefe. Terry is an old indie film guy from LA, but for the last 8 years or so, he had inherited his grandparents' motel out in Greenport, New York, which is right on the tip of Long Island. And so I stayed at the motel that night, and we were walking around, and Terry said, well, we shoot a lot of fashion shoots out here and music videos, things like that, but no one's ever shot a feature, and we're pretty much closed in the winter. So if you ever want to shoot a feature here, let's do it. And I was like, this, his grandparents built this place in the 50s, 60s. It looks like right out of 1974. And I was like, well, we were just talking about Nixon. Let's do a Watergate film. And it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, I'm a little bit of a creature of Washington. I worked as a Senate speechwriter for Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa for a couple of years. I knew I had taken classes. He was kind of my mentor in college, Senator Tom Eagleton, who had been McGovern's running mate in 72 until he was kicked off. And so I kind of was always immersed in political history. I was a history and poli-sci major. So, and I've written about Watergate in other projects. So it didn't completely come out of nowhere. I knew a fair bit about it. We did a lot more research. And then I got my friend Daniel Moya involved, who'd worked a little bit on Bernard and Huey. And it turns out, and he came in to kind of flesh out the script. because I was still doing post-production and festivals with Bernard and Huey. And then coincidentally, his aunt and uncle owned a diner in Greenport, just down the street from the Silver Sands Motel. So we're like, well, that's 2 locations. Now we got to make a movie, you know? So that was it. And then the interesting thing, kind of the way into the story, was that in doing research, I found that there really were tapes of Nixon listening to his own tapes, that there were like 5 different offices in the White House complex that had these kind of sound activated recording devices, and he wouldn't always remember when they were on or not. So there are actual tapes of him playing with the buttons and getting it a little bit wrong. And so I was like, okay, that's the plausible in, you know, when you're doing historical fiction, as you say, you know, you need a kind of a suspension of disbelief moment, and that was it, because there really are those tapes. And so in theory, then there could be a tape of the erasing of the 18.5-minute gap. And once we kind of figured that out, that kind of cracked the story, and we were like, okay, that's how this person can get a hold of the tape, and then the rest is, you know, making the movie.
And who came up
with characters?
Awesome. And who came up with the, you know, the constantly shifting identities of the characters throughout the movie?
I think that was always kind of there. Like, we wanted to do a you know, I like in the pitch, I always told people, you know, it's like 3 Days of the Condor meets Who's Afraid of Virginia. Movie. Yeah, meets Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but hopefully a little funnier than either of those. And yeah, I mean, I love the 70s kind of thriller conspiracy movies, the Alan Pakula films, you know, Clute and 3 Days of the Condor. Well, that wasn't him, but you know, and of course All the President's Men, but which actually doesn't mention the tapes at all, interestingly enough. It kind of stops before you get to the tapes. So yeah, that whole kind of because actually on Bernard and Huey, we researched a lot of those films. I was looking at a lot of those films for that film, because that one was kind of based on Carnal Knowledge, which is 1971. So in the course of kind of doing the research on that one, I was looking at a lot of these other 70s films. So it sort of made sense.
Awesome.
Tell me a bit about the cinematography, because the aesthetic of it does have that, you know, in addition to the actual production design, the costuming, all that, there is this kind of a soft, hazy, kind of like a buttery feeling to it, especially in that diner scene where Connie and Paul, our 2 main characters, meet. It's almost an impossible atmosphere. I didn't think movies looked like that anymore.
It's like a 60 millimeter look.
Yeah, so we, my cinematographer Elle Schneider did a great job, and what we did was we had vintage lenses, you know, that were sense. Back from, I mean, because we shot digitally, but the lenses are old, and that's kind of the key. That's the real thing. Yeah,
and the color grade.
Yeah, although I mean, the grading, but that's kind of how it looks, you know, when you shoot with those lenses. Yeah, if anyone's doing this in the future, you know, get your hands on some old glass, and that, you know, that does most of the heavy lifting. Let's put it that way. So,
was that something that you sought out, those vintage lenses, or did you know someone who had them and they're like, hey, this would be perfect for your movie? How'd you come across those?
We work closely with a friend of ours who, a guy named Mike Nichols, not the Mike Nichols, another Mike Nichols, who worked at Able Cine, and I think Able had those lenses, so or they found them somewhere, and we had a set of primes and then a zoom lens, and then in post-production I did a lot of optical zooms as well, either in concert with the zoom lens or using the primes and doing that. And that's kind of a throwback to something in the early 70s. They would do optical zooms a lot, and when I was in film school, I played with an optical printer, so I've done those myself before, and it's something that is it's a subtle thing, but people try to avoid making it look like you did that now, and because it increases the grain. But I kind of embraced it. So
yeah, if you shoot 4K, I think it's easier to do now.
Yeah. So there's a chapter on it in my book.
There you go, read it. So the lead actress, Willa Fitzgerald, I thought she did a great job.
Willa Fitzgerald, she's great. Yeah,
like a Nancy Drew type, you know, detective figure. She's kind of a TV star, right?
Yeah, she was on MTV's Scream series. She's been on a lot of TV series, but she's been in features too. She's done theater. She's been in a lot of great things. She just wrapped Amazon's doing a Jack Reacher series, and she's one of the leads on that.
So what was your outreach like to her? How did she get interested in the project? How did you guys talk about it?
One of her agents pitched her to me, and she was actually I think the first actress we met, and then just kind of kept coming back to her. And then when we were ready to shoot, she was available and willing and happy to do it. And she was fantastic to work with and is great in the film. So yeah.
You can make a Pulp Fiction type poster from that fight scene when she has that wacky fight scene towards the end.
But no spoilers.
Yeah. There's a fight.
There
scene.
may be a fight scene. Maybe there isn't a fight scene.
Yeah.
It could be an internal fight scene. She's working stuff out in her mind.
Maybe I imagined it.
One thing I want to talk about, because when I first heard about the movie, I get the feeling that because we hear a lot of Nixon and Al Haig and was it Haldeman, I think, on the tapes.
Yeah.
We hear, I don't know if we hear the entire 18 and a half minutes over the course of the movie. It feels like we might.
It's pretty much you do. Yeah.
Okay. And this is the imagined,
right.
18 and a half minutes.
Yeah,
so
nobody really knows what's on there. So we can make it up.
I want to ask you about that too, but first I want to talk about the casting of the people who are on that tape. Now, are you comfortable talking about this? Because I feel like it's out there now, but when I first heard about the movie, there was almost like this, don't tell anybody who was playing Nixon.
No, that's fine. It's because it's Bruce Campbell. It's Bruce Campbell playing Nixon, and John Cryer plays Haldeman, and Ted Raimi plays Al Haig.
Yes.
Who was Nixon's second chief of staff.
That's a good cast.
So I want to talk to you about that. Sujewa asked how you cast Willa. How did you cast these three actors to be, to be in a part that is not seen at all? It's only heard.
Well, because it's easier for actors.
But I mean, did you have them in mind, or was it like, did they come to you, or how did that work?
No, they we'd actually talked.
Yours, right?
Well, not John Cryer I've known for a long time. I haven't known him well, but I know him, and I tried to cast him in other films and never quite worked out. And so he was someone that I just kind of reached out to directly and then went through his agents. And then Bruce was someone we had talked about him in my last film, and the schedule didn't work out for that. And then we talked about him for a different part in this film, and the schedule wasn't going to work out for that. But I said, but you're not getting off the hook that easy, Bruce. How'd you like to play Nixon? And it turns out that he was like 14 during the summer of, 1973, when there were the Nixon, Watergate hearings, on the Senate Watergate hearings. And he was a devoted follower of those hearings on TV. And so he always had a bit of a thing for Watergate and Nixon. And he had also recently played Ronald Reagan on an episode of Fargo. And I think got a lot of really great and well-deserved critical attention for that. And I think he enjoyed it because it was so different from, the Evil Dead kind of genre things. So, and it turns out he and Ted had actually just done a Nixon bit where actually Ted played Nixon and I think Bruce was Haldeman for kind of an album thing that they had done, a spoken word thing. So they both kind of really embraced it. And then just literally as a commitment from an actor, it's a lot easier. You can be in quite a bit of the movie for 2 hours of work. And then as it turned out, it was even easier because it was when the pandemic happened. So we shot most of the movie in March of 2020, and then we had to take a pause for 6 months while there was a pandemic going on in quarantine and no one was shooting. And we had 4 days left to go with the shoot, which we wound up picking up in September of 2020. But in that interim 6-month period, we're like, okay, well, what can we do to keep working? So I was editing the 80% of the film that we had in the can, but then this the voiceover thing, which was originally always going to be in post-production, we're like, you know what, all these actors are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs and they're getting anxious and they can't act. They can't do the thing that they love to do. So we basically did it this way on Zoom, which was kind of easier and simpler and cheaper. We also had a separate recording system with QuickTime files. But the point is they could all be in different parts of the country. Actually, Ted was even in Canada at the time. We didn't have to all get them in one studio at the same time. It was actually easier and cheaper and for all of us to do it, essentially like this. And it was a lot of fun and they were great.
So did they have, did everybody have, did you have to send them sound equipment, or did everybody have like nice fancy mics, or did you need that because you're playing tapes that are, kind
exactly.
of spotty quality anyway?
You hit on the key thing, that we knew that the audio would eventually be futzed. That's the technical term for it. That's what the sound guys do to make it sound like it was taped. So it didn't have to be 100% perfect quality. Like if you ever listen to the real Nixon tapes, you can barely hear them at all. I mean, we didn't want it that bad, but and also even like the mic placement is different for two different people in those rooms. So, but some of them, they all kind of do their own podcasts and recording and things. So they all had some semblance of some kind of equipment already kind of set up. So it was not that, it wasn't that complicated. Well, it was complicated. And then we used the Zoom track we recorded it just like you're doing as kind of the thing that we would sync everything to, but it made it allowed us to, have them act against each other as if they really were in the room, and I could direct them, so that was great.
So
modern movie making magic. Go ahead, Ian, you had a question?
Well, the last the last 2 points on the recordings. One is about the writing of it. How much was well, I guess it's kind of rolled into one. Did you write out the 18.5 minutes, or did you have kind of an outline, and then over these Zoom calls, did the actors improv or kind of contribute? You mentioned, Bruce was kind of a big Nixon head. So was it a very controlled thing and they were just reciting their lines, or did they kind of like throw little improvs and things into it?
There was very little improv. There was some room for it. We had some room for improv at the end, and some of that we did put in there. But no, because the way it worked was when we were on set during that first 2 weeks is when we shot the bulk of when the other characters are listening to the tape, and we needed them to react at certain cue points. And so during production, my producing partner, Daniel, and I, and our script supervisor, Tamara, we recorded a little scratch track version of the scripted, tape. And then Daniel actually hid in the room and was listening to the recording, and every minute or two would yell out a cue thing like Liddy or, coffee or, whatever the cue was. And then Willa and John Magaro, who's an amazing actor, they would kind of react to it as if they're hearing it on the tape. And then we didn't really change the writing of it that much, a little bit here and there. And actually we did some more research and actually found I don't know if you made it to the very, very end of the end credits, but there's a little snippet between between Bruce and John, that's a reference to something that we actually discovered, which I don't think anyone else knew about, which was something that comes on the 18.5 minute tape, but about 2 minutes after the gap in the tape. So nobody ever paid any attention to it because it's not, for the most part, they're not talking about Watergate, but but Nixon and Haldeman actually make a reference.
I remember
a film called The Hot Rock, which was what's his name? Robert Redford was in this movie, and it's a heist movie gone bad, and they're joking about how, oh yeah, it's kind of like this Watergate thing, everything got all screwed up. And we kind of, I did some research with the Miller Center at University of Virginia, and they sent me the tape the day before we recorded it, and I sent it to Bruce and John, and we're like, yeah, let's do that. Let's do our we tweaked it a little bit, but let's do our version of that, because it really is kind of historic. Nobody's ever paid any attention to that part. But otherwise, we had to stay pretty well scripted. And then in editing, I could kind of move things around a little bit. But they were all great together. Yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry, I thought one more thing about the tape.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
Campbell's Nixon. I mean, you mentioned he played Reagan. He played Elvis in Bubba Hotep,
Right. Yeah.
in a performance that was far more than just like a cartoonish impersonation. What struck me about his Nixon was how un-Nixon like it is. It didn't sound like everybody else's Nixon. It sounded
Exactly.
like a real human being. Was that something that you had imagined, you and Daniel, when you were kind of specking this out, or was that something that Bruce came up with? Like, I want to play Nixon, but I want to play him like an actual human being, even though it is kind of comedic what he's doing with those buttons.
Well, no, it was something that Bruce and I definitely talked about, and Daniel, and that we didn't just want an impersonation of Nixon. I mean, if you want that, you can literally hire Rich Little, who's still alive. God bless him. But I know, you could hire anyone, and then it wouldn't matter who the actor is. You could have a complete unknown actor who may do a great Nixon impersonation. But I wanted Bruce, I wanted it to use his talents. He's a talented actor and talented voice actor, and to bring his gravitas, his kind of sense of humor, his sense of irony, and as you say, like to make Nixon a bit humanized. Because again, we were sort of writing this, what's on the 18.5-minute gap is completely made up. Nobody knows what's on the 18.5-minute gap. And yet everything that is on there that we wrote was very specifically researched and is based on something that's either on another tape or something that came out in the historical record later. So everything on there is actually 100% true. But as far as the performance itself, it was important, I think, for all of us to we want Bruce Campbell as Nixon, not just Nixon,
Yeah,
Right.
he did a great job.
Yeah. I mean, we could have, in theory, you could have taken, you could have done a whole AI thing and literally had Nixon,
Yes.
I mean, you could
Nixon
do
as
what,
Nixon.
and I'm sure someone could do that, it's
And
a lot
Will,
of work.
I'll bet,
but
yeah.
Yeah.
So
But that's not what we wanted,
Good. Yeah, you guys made a good choice. Couple of things. Good diverse cast.
Thank you.
It's a story that takes place in the 70s DC area. You didn't necessarily have to have a diverse cast. A lot of the 70s actual movies are just like all white people. So was that a conscious choice, or was it just your friends? And Wandy Curtis Hall did a great job.
Yeah,
Talk about those two items.
Exactly. Yeah, Vondi is fantastic in the film, and an absolute treat and a treasure to work with. And he plays a character that, well, I won't go in too much, but he's a really fun character in the film. And then Maya Abney, plays a character in the film, and then Sullivan Jones is great. Diversity was key. It was key in real life. And if you know anything about Washington's like,
I lived there for a while.
85% Black, and I think it isn't always reflected in films, but if you've lived there and worked there, you know that it is. So you may as well have a film that reflects that. But it's interesting, if you look back at Clute, one of the FBI agents is Black in that film. And people kind of forget that. Like that was, it's not like casting was always 100% white either. But you kind of have to look for it. There's diverse casting in 3 Days of the Condor too. So, but no, it was important. I mean, we're making this film in 2020, we're not making it at another time. So this, we need to reflect what's going on now. But again, it was reflective of the time. And what was interesting with Vondi's character, and Vondi and I talked about this a lot, because is that, he's playing a World War II veteran. And we kind of tried to play with all the different generations, and people kind of forget, like, oh, you're making a 74 film. Oh, it should just have hippies in it or something. But no, there's also this whole generation of World War II
people.
Era veterans from that time. And his character, played an African-American, U.S. veteran who was there in Normandy and fought in France. And that's a big part of who that character is. And the irony is that he's married to Kathy Curtin's character, and it's an interracial marriage. And the irony is that they could, it wasn't legal for them to live, as a married couple in America at the time. And so because of that, they spend a lot of time overseas. They're a very cosmopolitan couple, and we learned to find out, why that is. And so there's certain ironies about that relationship that sort of just give it a lot more backstory and resonance than if they were just, you know, plain old white couple, for example. So yeah, so it was, and a similar thing with Sullivan Jones' character. He plays the, you know, one of the hippies, or you think he's a hippie,
the cult leader,
and he's also a Vietnam veteran. And so, you know, what was it like for Black Vietnam veterans when they came back to the States, and what they were going through, and where that would lead them. And so we kind of, you know, played with that idea as well.
A lot of great characters. Ian, any more questions?
I do. And it has to do with something that, you know, we're not going to talk spoilers, but Sujewa kind of already let the cat out of the bag with the fight, which may or may not be internal or external, may or may not happen. But let's just say there was some kind of an altercation at the end of this film. And let's just say that the altercation seemed very elaborate, but we, the audience, were not privy to most of it. My question is, was this choreographed on the page? Did you know what was going on as the audience was focused on, say, a very important piece of equipment, you know, kind of zooming in and around and seeing what was going on with this particular piece of equipment, knowing that in the background,
right here.
Oh my God, it's the thing. Awesome.
It's the thing. It's the tape player. Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh my God, it's heavy.
Oh.
Save it. You can auction it in 10 years.
Yeah.
Now, where did you find that?
On eBay.
Oh man.
So
that's great.
Yeah, our friend Andrew, who directed oh crap, now I can't think of the name of the movie, but a friend of mine had tape players in his movie, had reel-to-reel players, and
Andrew Wachowski?
No. It was a film that we had at Slamdance. Guy lives in Oklahoma City. Sci-fi film, kind of set in the 50s. Crap, I can't think of it.
It'll come to you later.
It'll come to me. Anyway, but he and his actors had used tape players in that, and he said, yeah, just get them on eBay. But the trick is to get a couple extra versions of them, and they're not that expensive, which is thankfully. But you never know if they're going to work or not work. We were lucky; all of ours, I think, worked pretty well. And we had to get a couple different versions because different characters have different reel-to-reel players. But yeah, that was pretty much all scripted. But I have to say, the timetable of shooting it was a little bit accelerated because that turned out to be the last day before we wrapped because of the pandemic. So we had a very long day, but we had a great fight choreographer, my friend Chris Dukes, who's actually been in every one of my films, including my first film, Omaha the Movie. There's a poster for it. And so he came out to Greenport and was the choreographer for that. And then the actors themselves were great, you know, and we did it safely, and nobody died, nobody got injured. So that was the most important thing, honestly.
So I guess,
go ahead.
I was going to say, so you were shooting, you know, this was like the last big thing. So was there any fight stuff that you didn't have time to film, and so you kind of made other choices what the camera was doing, and just kind of like made it an artistic choice, you know, after the fact, or was it always kind of intended that way?
It was it was pretty much intended that way.
Okay.
So yeah, I know what you're talking about, and that was intentional, and I think is in the script. So
it's very, you know, whether or not there is something to talk about, I'm still dancing around it. It was very well done.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
As I said in my blog post, it gets into like Tarantino territory. Is this the first time you did something like this in one of your movies?
A fight scene?
Like that?
Like that?
A wild fight scene.
Well, actually, my first film, Omaha the Movie, ends at a fight scene at Carhenge, which is an exact replica of Stonehenge built out of old American cars stuck in the ground. And that's
good reason to see that movie.
Exactly. And I had the very first film I worked on. I wasn't the director, thankfully. I was the second AD, but was called American Kickboxer 2. It was a kickboxing movie shot in the Philippines. So I've been around fight scenes before, but my last couple films were a bit did not have as much action in them. But it's, you know, that's presupposing there's any action in this one. So
that's right. Yeah, the movie is great. Everyone should see it, and Dan should get an Academy Award for its American history done in a new way.
Well, thank you. From your lips to the Academy's ears.
There we go. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to kind of close things out. Yeah, you mentioned the festivals and all that. So what's I guess the release plan, or is that still being kind of worked out? Is it going to be a VOD, or are it going to be, get a theatrical run?
Well, just between me and you two, the next June is the 50th anniversary of the Watergate break-in, and 3 days later of the 18.5-minute gap. So I think we're kind of focused, regardless of who the distributor is, because we don't know that, because we just started sending it to them, and honestly, we haven't heard back from most of them yet. I think that will be the ideal time, because there's going to be a lot of press about Watergate. There'll be CNN things, there'll be documentaries about it. I know there's 2 miniseries coming out around then. And the nice thing is that gives us a little bit of time to be patient and wait for the pandemic to hopefully run its course, and maybe more people are in theaters then. But philosophically, I kind of feel like your distribution starts with the festivals. Your festivals are the beginning of your distribution. And if you just see them as a means to get distribution, you're kind of missing the forest for the trees. So every audience we're screening to, that's an audience, that's an audience we embrace. And regardless of whether it's at a festival or at a university setting, because I'm sure we're going to do some university screenings with this. We've got one in the works already, but I know in the spring, I'm sure there's going to be some more, because it is an interesting thing to talk about, not just to film classes, but also to history and political science classes too. Like, what is real? What isn't real? What did we make up? What did we reveal in our research? And there's a lot of fun things about it. And hopefully it makes Watergate a little bit more fun for some people that just, it was a stuffy chapter in their book, or they vaguely remember it or something like that. But it really is amazing. It's interesting how much we realized was true, like going back and researching it, like all the stuff with ITT and Wonder Bread, that's all true.
Wow.
Bizarrely enough, ITT owned Wonder Bread back in the day, and ITT really did bribe the Nixon team at various times, and that was actually poised to be a bigger scandal than Watergate. And there's so there's a lot of weird truth to it that is brought together by these fictional characters. So
maybe they did Watergate to hide the Wonder Bread scandal. Preempted.
Maybe.
Also, it's a great idea bringing it out next year with the anniversary of Watergate.
Yeah, and we don't, we're lucky we don't have any investors breaking our kneecaps to get this thing sold right away. I don't have anything else going on.
Awesome.
I'm happy. I enjoyed making the film. I enjoyed everyone who worked on the film, the cast, everyone. So we're all just having a good time with it right now. We're like, yeah, let's go to festivals. And if I can't go to a festival like Tallgrass, my cinematographer is going to go and represent that. And we'll do some things with the actors too. So yeah, nice. We're just enjoying it, and we're enjoying the ride.
And now distribution starts even before film festivals. I'm sending my movie to reviewers who are reviewing it because it's coming out at some point next year. So the starting point is moving further and further back.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have for 18.5 and Secret Society for Slow Romance, at least for this week, because
that's right. This is the 40th anniversary of the release of My Dinner with Andre. So
that's right.
So everyone should cover both movies going forward.
Yes, everyone should watch both movies, and
that's right.
And definitely talk about them, because man,
and 18.5.
Yes, and 18.5 for sure. Oddball question, Dan, because my knowledge of Watergate or the Nixon presidency is pretty much limited to pop culture and Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. Right. Have you ever thought about adapting that book like to a film?
No, but it's a great idea.
Especially if someone has a bunch of money to spend on it.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
And I do have some connections to the Hunter people, so that would be interesting.
Awesome.
Make it happen for me, if for no other reason. No.
Great episode. Yes. Good job, Dan. Thanks for all the info.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. This has been
you, guys.
a lot of fun. Yeah, and good luck with the film. Where can we? I know you've got a website, danmirvish.com. Is there any other place we can follow you? What's your Twitter handle? Are you on Instagram, Facebook?
Yes.
What's your stuff?
I'm on all of them. So yeah, the mothership is danmirvish.com, but yes, on Instagram, I think I'm either Dan Mirvish or D Mirvish at all of them. So at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I'm a TikToker now.
All right.
Wave of the future. And then there's also separate handles for 18 and a half, which in most cases is 18, the number 18 and a half, all spelled out, movie, on Instagram, on the Twitter, on the Facebook, on all those things.
Okay.
And
Well,
I'll be promoting this podcast for many weeks, so people will hear about it.
yeah, and I'll have links to all that stuff down below in the description, so check that out. Thank you again very much, Dan. Thank you, Sujewa. It's been a lot of fun hanging out and talking about these awesome films and the indie film landscape. This has been IndieSeen episode 2. Yes. And cut.